there's an undercurrent of rage for me on this record. That the sadness is there, the funeral doom is there, but you read about that there were each band member had personal struggles during the writing process of this record, and I feel like I can feel that. I feel like that's why they chose to kind of strip it back and to just bring the heaviness to the forefront, because they weren't just sad, they were angry about the personal things in their lives, and to bring the death doom elements back to the forefront. That was the reasoning behind it. That's what I feel when I hear this record.
What's up, heavy metallurgists? This is Kellen from Killing for Company, and I am joined by the one and only Jim, aka Morbid Crank, for his debut on a heavy metallurgy review. Today, we're going to be talking about the 7th full length from Evoken entitled Mendacium. So this is the 7th full length released here on Profound Lore by Evoken. I wanted to have Jim come on and talk about this album with me. Being part of Album Club, this subject has come about. We covered Hypnagogia for an Album Club episode. I know Jim's a massive fan of this band. I had heard sort of rumors that we were going to get a new full length this year from Evoken. I didn't believe it initially, but they played at Maryland Death Fest. It kind of got some momentum rolling. And here I'm happy to get a brand new full length by arguably the most notable American death doom or funeral doom band. Obviously, with the kind of background, they're a model of consistency, in my opinion. They take their time. It's not necessarily the most prolific band for a group that's been around essentially since the mid 90s. In some shape or form. Did you have a lot of expectation going into this about what it would sound like, and kind of get your thoughts here, Jim, in terms of after the success of Hypnagogia and with such a long relationship with this band, what were your kind of expectations getting into Mendacium?
Before they kind of released like a statement about what direction they were going to go in for this record, I figured they would continue kind of the line established from Atramore's forward, which was more on the experimental side, staring dead-eyed into the gothic elements, more cello, which I love the strings element that they have on both of the last two records a lot. There's so much emotion tied up in that for me. And so when I heard that they were kind of going to go in a different direction, more like the older stuff, more reminiscent of their, influences like disembowelment and stuff, I was at first when I read that, I was a little disappointed because I like where they're going. I like that they kind of slowly include more, I almost want to say chamber music type elements, you know what I mean, in what they're doing.
Sure,
Not so much
sure.
orchestral, but more like, a few different, classical pieces there. But I also thought I was like, well, I really like all the older stuff though. You know what I mean? I'm like, what am I saying? If they're gonna go back that way, there's, first of all, number one, there's a reason for it. And number two, it's not gonna disappoint. And so I kind of checked myself before I, started feeling like, overly like dismayed at what I'd read, and said, hey, you know what, I'm gonna wait till I hear it. And I know it's gonna be great, and after listening to it, I'm happy to say that, it doesn't disappoint. If you came in at Atramore's or Hypnagogia, you may feel like there's a space there, that wasn't there before, where before you had those sort of, classical instrumentation going along, with the funeral doom. There's plenty of keyboards and synths to be had here, but that isn't present. So that it may give you a little bit of a checkup to kind of take it for what it is. But if you're a long time fan, I think that you're not only going to come to it as from a place of appreciation, but you're going to see that they still push themselves musically, just in a different way. So we can kind of get into that, but that's what I see.
So the band, for the most part, like that model of consistency and kind of knowing what to expect. as the lineup exists today, it's been consistent for, I guess, over a decade. The old school members are Vince Verkay and John Paradiso here, but Don Zaros joins, David Wagner, Chris Molinari, all of them are back. Essentially, since Atramores after, this has been sort of the same group. And I very much agree with you in the sense that I especially Hypnagogia. To your point, the strings on that, I wonder if you zoom out and this band continues to play for the next decade plus, if that'll be a record that really sort of stands alone as sort of a moment of experimentation, given the subject matter. Because I 100% agree with you. When I first heard this, this reminded me of like Antithesis of the Light earlier, right? Like reaching back into that sort of like aughts era of this band. So I wonder now, like instead of thinking of Hypnagogia or Atramore as being sort of the overall trajectory of where Evoken was going, I think it may just be a period in time. And this is sort of like, to your point, a lot of this reminds you of Disembowelment. Sonically, sort of the clean guitars that are drifting over the top of this Death Doom. It is a hallmark to what their sound is. So I 100% agree. Quietus came to mind, is another one that sort of stands out. But we'll get to the songwriting here in a second. When I listen to a record like Antithesis of the Light, there's a certain amount of commitment. I think that record is a challenging, sort of long, drawn out, probably their most dedicated funeral doom listen to me. I don't know if you have the same thoughts there. And when I came back to this, I thought there was probably some lesson learned or just a certain degree of like efficiency of a songwriting that this record has. Mendacium, I never feel is like too labored or like they lose track, or you really have to sort of be patient with where a song is going.
Yeah. I mean, that record I think is almost intentionally, challenging. I think that they wanted to make something that was, moving in a way that wasn't pointed towards like an emotional release. When I listen to that one, like they wanted you to kind of like feel disturbed a little bit, a little put off, a little off kilter, and they succeeded with that. So yeah, when you B that one with that previous this one with that previous album, I would say that there is a progression in songwriting because they can get that tension going, but every time there's a moment of tension on Mendacium for me, there's also a moment of release. When it gets really tense, when it leans really into the funeral doom or the death metal, there's these incredibly, emotional, like, synth and higher up on the neck moments that kind of, pull emotion right out of me or make me feel something else. It's like the skies part and there's this like angelic, like, keyboard refrain going
Right.
on. Whereas, that album in particular and Antithesis, there was really none of that. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is not a diss. That is a different exploration of emotions for me or even consciousness. Like it's taking you somewhere else. And having discomfort for the entire length of an album can make you, come out of it at the end feeling a release just on your own, even though the music's not giving it to you. But I do feel that when you've got that push and pull of release and you know how to do it where you can make a 9-minute song not feel like 9 minutes, that to me is
Right.
maturity in songwriting.
Right.
And that's the difference here. These are guys that somehow the perfect metal band for me, doesn't lose touch with who they are and where they've come from, but continues to push the boundaries of that realm that they've created sonically. And that's what Evoken does here. Even though this is a step away from the last two records, that progression of songwriting they haven't erased. They've turned that, laser beam focus on something different. Like they've got those chops are kind of embedded to me in what they do. That progression of songwriting, that taking in of different influences, the Gothic and the classical influences and all that. But instead of like making it overt, it's kind of more underneath, and they just use it to keep the focus of the song more cohesive as a whole. Okay.
Yeah, I see. This is why I wanted Jim. We were going to have a broader discussion. Knowing the back catalog would be so much more helpful to kind of put this in the proper sort of frame of reference. Just for people who may not know this band, I think you can chime in, Jim, if you want to add anything in terms of their sound. I think, yeah, they're an American death doom band. That's probably the first place I'll start. But we've already talked about sort of funeral elements. Jim talked about Gothic elements. They come from also a time period where I think extreme metal was sort of the forefront of underground consciousness. So they're well acquainted with atmospheric qualities within death metal and black metal. I would always be surprised if they're also sort of pulling from different genres in terms of providing additional atmosphere. Jim mentioned sort of this interest in potential, it's like chamber music in terms of what can we get more classical instrumentation to offer within this genre, this context. So I don't know if there's anything more to bring to the description in terms of their sound. But the fact that they navigate those so well, I think speaks to a certain kind of diversity of approach that makes something as potentially challenging of a listen in terms of patience for a listener to experience. They can incorporate them with enough contrast. Your sort of description of sort of light and dark and dynamic changes in terms of song, that's going to come up probably several times in the course of our discussion here today. But I don't know if there's any sort of way you'd like to add to that in terms of describing for anyone who's never heard of Evoken before what they should expect.
So, if you've listened to Skepticism, Thurgathon, Disembowelment, especially, with that sort of like that effect of shimmering guitar over a death doom riff that's even slower than a death doom band would play it. That's what Evoken is. I think they really embrace, those Finnish forebears of funeral doom, Thurgathon and Skepticism. I mean, Evoken is a song off the Thurgathon demo, if I remember correctly, but it's still injected with their own element. There's a real sadness in the melody lines of Evoken when they're playing up higher on the neck. That's what gets me about this band on every one of their records. When they the riffs are awesome, love the funeral doom riffs, but when there's those moments where they go up higher on the neck and these aren't shredding melody lines. These are one note, 4 measures, 6 measures, 8 measures long, but phrased perfectly. Like it for me, it opens up, sort of the airways of my emotions, and I really connect with it. And so that's kind of, if I had to kind of bring in their add to the description, it would be, distilling the Finnish fathers of funeral doom, but with a really very American emotionalism that isn't really present. Like there's a different way. Americans by and large are, or at least from when I talk to people from your, like, we're more open about our emotions, we're more expressive and all that kind of thing. And I feel like, and it may just be because whatever, there's a cultural connection here because they're from the States, but for me, I feel like there's more of an emotional touch to what they're doing. It's not just a morose feeling. It's this particular kind of sadness that I connect with in a way that I don't with their influences. But I still love those bands. Don't get me wrong. There's records behind me that prove that. But something about when I heard Shades of Night Descending, it hit me like really hard, and the rest is history.
Okay, cool. So let's get into Mendacium here. I'll defer here for your first choice, Jim. Sort of moment on this record that stood out to you, a particular song that you want to get into and think of as a highlight for the people to pay attention to.
So yeah, we'll talk about Sext. Which, okay, let's get out of the way. It's a bizarre title for a song. I don't know what it's about. I focused on the music and not the lyrics on on here. Whatever strange title aside,
Can I quickly jump in here? I
Sure,
do believe
please do.
all of these are reference. So the concept for the record has to do, I believe, with an Anglican priest who is sick and in isolation. So all of these I do are offering or specific terms that the church used during the, I guess, dark ages, different sort of like service or prayers aspects to religious ritual for the Christian church. So that's, I guess, all of these names come from that. But they were brand new to me, so I completely get where you're coming from, Jim.
I should have known there'd be something deeper coming from Evoken. You know, we're just like, let's just be strange and just have a 4-letter word with Sext. But what's cool about this song is it has that light and dark that Kellen referenced earlier. This is completely emblematic of that push-pull Evoken songwriting technique that they use. It's because it starts out with quiet synths, that shimmering electric acoustic guitar that you'll find in goth bands and post-punk bands, Echo and the Bunnymen, Susie and the Banshees, stuff like that. And then, for the first 4 minutes, that's what you hear. You hear that, the synths and the electroacoustic guitar and a voice, not really a singing for like 4 minutes. And I was totally fine with that. I loved it for what it was. I kind of thought when I first heard it, I was like, oh, well, this song's just that. This is going to be that,
right,
the sound for the song. But then the riff comes in, really cool drum work done there behind it. And there's 7 minutes, this crazy headbanging worthy, palm muted downpick riff just comes in. It's just, oh man, it feels like lava coming down a mountain, like onto you. and behind it there's running double bass and these really creepy synths, this sort of filling out all the angles around it. It is such a cool and unexpected twist from where the song starts, and whenever I hear it, those first 4 minutes, even as many times I listen to the song, it's like I'm not ready for that riff every time, but it is pure death doom, and it just makes so much sense in the context of who Evoken is to do that. And as a fan, to hear that heaviness, that's, embrace the emptiness. We're talking way back, bringing that more death metal influences back to the forefront, but done with such a long interlude of who they have been, since Atramore's Ford. That push and pull, man, it just gets me in every time, and that song is really it stuck out to me, and the riff had that much more impact because they keep that direction of who they were, minus the real experimental kind of stuff, minus the strings and stuff, but still that sort of warble of post-punk that they have, and then going into just slime ridden death doom. It just makes me want to punch through a wall or something when I hear it. So that's what Evoken's all about. So
all right, so I'll jump in here for the noteworthy moment. So for the track that I'm going to talk about is number 4, Terse, the one that precedes the one that Jim just talked about. On this track, you get a lot of the early atmospheric qualities that begin at the very start of the song, and it lasts for a few minutes. It's sort of the shadows drifting across the floor, the blood pooling, like you see on the album cover. What happens is we get sort of this dynamic shift. Drums sort of come in out of all that shimmering guitar work. What starts as like light sitting atop a wave, all of a sudden sort of erupts into something a bit more chaotic. Drums build, and you can feel the rest of the song sort of taking shape. So we ride this sort of tumultuous wave for a few more minutes. And then at the end, probably like something completely that you are not expecting is this thing to erupt into a full-on death metal assault. It's the closing moments of this track. But just like Jim and I were talking about, this is a band that from part of the country that is embroiled in sort of an explosion of death metal from that region in the late 90s, like really the mid to late 90s. There's a lot of great American death metal coming out. So while they took a decidedly more sort of funeral doom approach, there's elements to this band that feel decidedly death metal. And we get that sort of progressive sort of shift in momentum, in attack in the closing moments of this record. We started with all this sort of incredibly slow atmospheric qualities. Towards the middle of the song, we get a progressive build, and then we get the all-out assault in the closing moments of this song. So I guess what it's cool when you listen to a track like this is to realize that they had gone through enough sort of thorough composition, or they had like matured enough as songwriters. From the beginning of this song, they know exactly where it's going to end, and they're in no rush to get there. I think that's like a sign of a band that's incredibly well practiced. They trust each other in the songwriting process, and to know that there is this sort of mature narrative arc to their songwriting. There's going to be a point where we understand, not just in terms of a concept record that they've delved into in the past, but they're good storytellers in sort of broader themes. But even within individual songs, you get the sense that they know exactly where to begin, how to create drama in the midst of it, and then give you sort of captivating way to end it. I think that's a great example of like how you would navigate all these different influences and still keep a funeral doom lesson or a death doom listen and a 9-minute plus song really captivating to your listeners.
We come to the close of this record, and you're wondering as a listener, where's Evoken going to go with this? Are they going to go gentle into that good night with a nice warbly synth, or are they going to do something that's halfway to the heaviness, or are they going to crush you? Evoken's going to crush you. I'll go spoiler alert. It does start with synth about 1 minute into the song, and with the electroacoustic, but then you hear it tremolo picked, with the death metal behind it. The that shimmering guitar that we referenced several times, that's a hallmark of Evoken sound, is there, but it's being played fast, and it gives a whole new dynamic to what we come to expect from Evoken, and it builds straight up into the death metal, which hits you about 145 in. But that's really not even the crushing moment. The crushing moment of this song comes where we're reaching the end, and there's this bend to the note. And right after that crazy bend on the low end guitar, palm muted crushing, slow but stomping. And with that stomp, there is a piano hitting the low keys, just bang, bang, bang. It is maddening. It is, you could see Mozart bashing his head into his piano. You could see someone holding the guitar up high and just putting all of their edge into every down pick. It is absolutely crushing and stunning, and it sounds so unique. We've all heard the palm mute crunch before, but not the way it's done here. Evoken somehow finds a way to make it their own, and a big part of that is the keyboard player hitting those low piano tones at the same time. And it is everything I think that the band has been going through that led to the development of the songs for this record. Everything that inspired them in their personal lives to create this art comes out in that moment, because it isn't just funeral doom anymore. It's funeral rage, and you feel it as a listener.
All right. So I'm so happy, one, that you brought that up, Jim. That was in my notes. If you didn't bring it up, I was going to bring it up. But what's interesting is that moment was the first time I hadn't been paying attention for just a straight up piano on this record. You kind of mentioned how, Hypnagogia, there was more explicit use of um, whatever chamber orchestral, sort of aspects, minimalistic in their sort of implementation, but still noticeable. Um, and because there is such a pervasive use of like synthesizer keys throughout this listen, I mean, that is Evoken hallmark, right? I really wasn't paying attention for just a straight up piano. And there in Compline, it just absolutely, to your point, it is like a stark contrast texturally and sort of like the chord shape that it forces, right? There's a certain sort of punctual dissonance when that happens that really kind of pulls you out of the entirety to listen. To your point, do a funeral rage. That's one way to. I'll let you credit you with that term. But what it did force me is I went back to this and I thought, is there another time on this record where I actually hear a straight up piano? Because it was, lost on me. And I had to go back to the very first track. So on Matins. And I thought that was interesting that the piano shows up as sort of a bookend character here on this listen. We get it obviously. Now to Jim's point, it only shows up in the way he describes it on the closer. But on Matins, it actually is a very different character, or has a very different place in the song. Matins opens, and I think it is one of the more heroic or sort of, I don't know, like uplifting moment throughout the entirety of this listen. And we actually get a kind of a guitar solo that accompanies the piano. And I think that's a really cool way, right? If it was a conscious and deliberate effort by the band, I can't speak to that, but I'm sort of speculating here in terms of how they wanted to use the piano. One, to our point earlier, is like a clear contrast to Hypnagogia. Like, this is not a consistent aspect of the sound. It is specifically in two areas in my mind. Now, if they did use a piano throughout the rest of the listen and it was buried under 14 layers of synthesizers, shame on me. I didn't hear it. But for me, the fact that they use it in Matins and the opener in that kind of light, and then really just sort of slam you into the coffin on the closer in Compound. Like, it's such an interesting way that when you approach it as, you're listening to this potentially through the eyes or through the ears as this protagonist in the story, meaning he comes into this secluded, alone, sort of devoted to his faith, hoping to survive his illness, right? And I feel on Matins, we get this sort of glimmer of hope, right? We have like this omen when that piano shows up, right? As to say, like, a religious figure. And it may serve as inspiration at the beginning of this record. But the time we get to the end of this listen, it is not there to provide hope, right? It is one of despair. It is one of betrayal. It is one of confusion. It is a harrowing way to end this listen. So we got Jim's sort of nail in the coffin moment, but let's take you back to the beginning of this listen and show you where the piano shows up to give you a bit of contrast. Okay, for Jim,
that was really well said, Kellen. I just have to say, man, that was awesome, because it's like going from hope at the beginning to like rage at the dying of the light at the end. You know what I mean? It's full on Dylan Thomas, man. It's like, I'm dying. This is it. There's no fucking hope, man. This shit doesn't work. Yeah.
My God has forsaken me, right?
Yeah.
Is it this moment, right?
Yeah, 1,000%.
Okay. There's a lot of glowing praise that we've heaped at this at the Mendacium. I and perfectly, transparent, this is a band that has yet to like really disappoint me. They are a model of consistency, like I mentioned earlier, and I think they do something really well, especially sort of in the 21st century here with the sort of myriad of releases that we kind of are thrown into on a consistent basis. Like they kind of take their time. There's something to be said about 2018 is when Hypnagogia comes out. 7 years later, we get this release and, at this point in their sort of history as a band, um, they've put together enough of a established and impressive catalog. I kind of wish that they keep that level of that standard of release sort of in mind. So this, while it was returned to something a familiar sound, it is a welcome return for me. I still think they are the pinnacle of the American sort of death doom, funeral doom, whatever you want to call that. This is the apex that this, America has to offer. It's an absolutely killer record. I know we kind of talked about a little bit regarding their past and differences. Was there anything that you felt in like let down or criticism you had for this record at all, Jim, or is it just all good news here?
What I said earlier, I stand by on it. If you came on board with Evoken later, like on Atramores or Hypnagogia, I do feel you're going to miss those stringed instruments. I do feel you're going to miss the cello and all of that, which adds a really extra cool dimension, to the presentation of their sound. But if you're a longtime fan, you're going to understand what's happening here. It is going to make sense to you, and it's going to be presented in a new way. They're not just rehashing old riffs. They're presenting them with, interesting keyboards around them, piano around them. There's a bass break on this record, which they almost never do. A bass break is really rare for Evoken to do that, and it's really done well and perfectly timed in the song. There's a little bit more of a vocal experimentation here. I've always felt like he had this kind of like Tom G slash Peter Steele type spoken voice that he
Yeah.
does, and there's almost like a little bit more of a sing song element to it. It's still mostly spoken, but in particular, it's on terse. I think about the 6 minute mark, you kind of hear some of that. Even if you came in late, I would say give this album time, let it settle into you, because you're going to find a different way of them bringing in those songwriting tools of theirs without that extra orchestral element. Yeah, it kind of depends for me, as I'm speaking to the people watching this, like where you came in on Evoken, where this album will sit with you. But if you came in late, though, I'm not saying give up on it. I'm saying you're going to give it more time. It's going to be a little heavier than you're used to. There's double bass in here. There's tremolo picking, things that really weren't present on the last two records. But there is a very strong emotional undertone behind it. And when I read about leading up to this record, all the personal struggles that the band members went through, knowing that's where it came from in these intervening years, it makes you connect with it on that level. I will say that for me personally, that I think this is a great sort of unexpected change in their trajectory, because I do love their old stuff. So I'm like, hey, this is cool. I am good with it. But I do want them to go back to those elements, because I really really like them. I would put Hypnagogia up there with one of my all time favorite records of any band. I never get tired of it. It's been 7 years now, and I still listen to it often. At least like one or two songs off of it.
Yeah.
Like it's just had that much of an impact to me. I do hope that they can start looking inward again as they move forward. But I also know, as a musician myself, just someone that appreciates art, that you got to be true to your experiences that you're going through in life and how they announce themselves through your expression. And I feel like the announcement of what they were experiencing came out through a heavier take on their sound, and they followed that. instead of trying to veer from it and make it, you know, not true to what they were feeling. Like, we're not feeling introspective right now. We're feeling angry. We're feeling angry about the pain of life. We're feeling angry about, why give us this consciousness, if it's only short-lived? Why give us this, spirituality and deeper understanding of what existence is if the people that we care about are going to be taken away from us? It would have been better had we not ever, walked out of the garden at all, and that's the vibe I get from this record. And I feel that, when you embrace that, the overarching theme is going to be anger. I completely understand this record, completely. But I do hope that, because life is ebb and flow, right? It's wave in, wave out. I hope that the wave of this goes out, and when the tide comes back in, they're ready to push the more experimental side on the record. But that is, again, no way a diss on this record. I feel like they continue to break new ground, and I want them to continue that because it's really exciting. But I also, as a true metal fan, like to be reminded every once in a while of what got me into a band in the first place, and this record reminded me of that.
Yeah, it's cool how, like, I think you said that incredibly well. They took over the two. I mean, really, for me, I guess Quietus is going to be where I sort of immediately jump to when I listen to this. It sounds different, but you realize in the 24 years that separate them, 2 decades plus, how that experimentation or progression in their sound feels incredibly sort of subtle as an incremental shift through those years. Like, I never felt there was this like, whoa, where did this come from? Like, what is this band doing? You know what I mean? Like, I never had that moment with Evoken. So it's cool for a band to be playing in this style, and we feel like where they sort of experimented or progressed in their sound is still like a welcome addition that they can go back to. It doesn't, those aren't sort of records that serve as a disservice in their catalog. Right? Like, I think there's some of the real highlights, but the fact they can go back and be like, oh, they're went back to their old stuff, like, it feels like a welcome, sort of sort of assertion as to what this band sort of got started doing. If they ever want to go back and do kind of experiment in some places, they absolutely can, but it's just like a very well judged sort of sense of direction through the years, where we end up praising their more sort of ambitious experimentation just because of how they really sort of studied and took their time in taking those steps. So yeah, I hope they keep track of some of the things that we heard on Hypnagogy and Atramores. But the one thing I would say is I come away with this record, especially sort of, there's a couple of sort of instrumental moments here. You kind of pour over the entirety of the track list. The two sort of instrumentals I'm talking about here are Prime, which is the third track, and Vespers, the track number 7. They're like well fleshed out instrumental sort of moments here. And it's cool that you put some sort of life and meaning and purpose in them. They don't feel like afterthoughts. And then you combine that with the sense that, we kind of talked about these key tracks for over about an hour and 3 minutes long. This record feels incredibly well judged. And the closing point I want to make here is, for all that experimentation that we got in the previous sort of, let's say, 20 years, or at least sort of new additions to their sound, I feel like they've returned to something that they got started with some maturation or sort of lessons learned. I don't know if it's the profound lore sort of record label, yada, 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 but this feels like a record that may not be as raw as some of their earlier stuff, but I do think you see some improved sort of well-judged songwriting on it. The one thing that I think we should sort of talk about as a potential criticism, how do we feel about the album artwork? Now, this is a band that I would say Evoken's never been known for exceptional album artwork. Like, I don't think that's their thing, right? Even they've played with different sort of band logos through the year. Like, we get this sort of traditional band logo, this dripping sort of death metal thing, and then we've had the more sort of straightforward font Evoken that we got on Hypnagogia. Like, any thoughts in terms of the album artwork or the covers for their catalog?
I hear what you're saying. The album covers that I like from Evoken are Embrace the Emptiness, Atremors and Hypnagogia. And you can see when you look at Embrace Emptiness and Atremors, there's sort of that cloaked figure thing going along, pathways into the woods or, cemetery. All that feels very close to a feeling that I get when I'm listening to the band. And when and of course, my favorite cover is Hypnagogia. It completely epitomizes World War I trench warfare. You've got the barbed wire, the fence, the owl sitting on it. But the other covers, we're talking about A Crest of the Void, Antithesis of Light, and a quietus, especially. Like I feel like it's just I'm kind of like, huh, quietus. I don't really understand the cover at all. Mendacium, I like the ghastly,
It's the
ghost.
theme, right? It makes sense, right?
Yeah, it does, but there is some strange thing, like the book behind him seems like it's just kind of floating out there. The Evoken logo is kind of like covering a window of the wall. It's really a minor criticism, but having a buddy of ours who does graphic design started pointing out things, and now it's like I can't unsee it. I'm like, oh yeah, that is kind of strange. It didn't bother me at first, but now I after having that discussion with him, it's kind of all I see.
Yeah.
So, but I do like the creepy bleeding character in the middle, right? But what's around him, just seems kind of oddly placed.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually enjoyed. I think add the album artwork for Atremors, like does a great job in sort of the like gothic elements to that. And then the other one that I think works well is Antithesis of Light. I that feels to me it does well for the theme, but also I get a little bit more of like the death metal stuff out of that. It's sort of like that. I don't know if it's pencil, but that sort of just black and white sort of rough artwork there works really
Right.
well for me. I just wish like the standard of music on these records is so high, the musicianship, everything. I just feel the artwork has yet to sort of knock it out of the park in the way that they sound. Um, so it's maybe a small gripe overall after heaping so much glowing praise over a band that both you and I have so much affection for. But it's just the one part to their sort of catalog that I feel is missing is like just killer artwork album after album to sort of match what's going on here. So that's
it's
why.
it's a testament to the quality of their music that like this is what we're nitpicking on. Like, well,
Right.
okay, well, we don't find much to downgrade there musically, so let's just talk about that art, man. Come on.
Sure. Sure. If I'm going to say one thing, that would be like, because I agree with you. The story here. That album artwork absolutely, speaks to the theme. And if you weren't already aware of what they were writing about, I think that would give you some sort of glimpse as to what they're trying to, the story they're trying to convey. It's sort of my nitpick is over the years, I would like more consistent, superb artwork, but nevertheless, my nitpick gripe for Mendacium, which is otherwise another sort of stellar record to an already sort of legendary catalog as a band. So I don't have any sort of closing thoughts. Obviously, I think both you and I really enjoyed this listen. They have yet to sort of put out a poor record or disappointing record, even an average record. I think all of them just sort of stand as sort of the epitome of the American sort of funeral scene, if you will. This is Mendacium's no exception to that. I think every single time they put out a record, it is going to, if not eclipse any other sort of American death doom band throughout that year, but I think potentially be one of the more stellar records that you're going to get, if not, in that year, then potentially the decade. Any closing thoughts you'd like to add here for Evoken's Mendacium?
Yeah, I would say that this is a band. Well, let me first define what for me is a successful musician. A successful musician is able to mirror what they feel through sound, and have someone else feel that feeling. It's very difficult to do on a level that you'll remember 5 minutes after, you know, the last note fades out. There's plenty of bands I listen to where, hey, it's just a good time. I just want to bang my head, name any Exodus song, you know, from the 80s. That there isn't like a emotional attachment to it for me. Whenever I hear Evoken, I feel like what they felt that guided them into writing the notes, writing the lyrics, coming up with a concept, composing the songs as a band, and everybody, you know, adding their own layers of personal touch onto it. It's all comes from a place of like mirroring their feelings through sound, and this album is no exception. I when I read, you know, again, I've brought up several times, when I read that they have all struggled over the last several years, and there was no specifics given. You know, it was just that there were trying times in their lives. Like as soon as I got through the first song, I was like, I feel that. I feel it. I feel like there's pain here, man. You know, it's real. That is the definition of a successful musician to me. When you can like take, you know, a feeling that's that overpowering for you, do something creative with it, and have someone on the other side feel it. It's an amazing thing, and that's why Evoken is one of my favorite bands. That's why all their music that they release is quality, and that's why Mendacium is no exception to that. You know, they've once again managed to take what was inside and share it with everyone else.
Please go check out this record. Evoken's 7th full length, Mendacium, comes out here October 17th on Profound Lore Records. That's going to wrap up the review here. Once again, my name is Kellen over at Killing for Company, and joining me for his review debut, Morbid Crank, Jim. You can see us both on Album Club every Wednesday night here on Heavy Metallurgy. Every once in a while, I'll post a video on my channel. Jim, you can always find him at IWAS. Anything you'd like to plug here in passing, Jim?
No, but if you like some cheap underground metal cassettes, check out my hopefully my links will be in the description, you know, for my shop. And we'll have some new American black metal coming out before the end of the year, and on cassette. So stay tuned.
All right, let's go listen to some Evoken. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you guys later. Bye.